but we were all three at yesterday's Wine Mag function. We had the Takara Cabernet, Reserve Cabernet 2017. That was the top red wine on the Wine Mag's panel for the whole year out of 927 wines, all tasted blind. And James and myself are on that panel. So that's an incredible Cabernet at 330 odd rand, incredible value. And then the De Morgan's on Shannon was the top white wine of the year, and 2018. So James, I'm still seeing you instead of me.
Isn't that just your configuration of your sequence?
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I'm going to start. All right, I'll start off then. A very warm welcome to everyone that's attending this afternoon. And I'd like to introduce my panel alongside me. First, Hugo Jacobs. Hugo has been in the industry for a long time. I remember working with Hugo almost 20 years ago. That's when we met, just after university. And Hugo's a sommelier at large and one of the partners in the Strauss & Co. auctions joint venture. And then we have Johan Milan, who's our vintage wine manager. He manages all the secondary market transactions, vintage and brokerage. So we'll hear from Johan a bit later. And then we have James Peterson, who is the incoming CEO of Wine Cellar. And that means I'm the outgoing CEO of Wine Cellar. I have stepped down. I will be remaining a shareholder moving forward and a non-executive director. And I will be involved in the Strauss & Co. auctions and on the investment side. But you're in very good hands, folks, leaving you to James and Johan. And I just thought that would be important to announce at this webinar. So let's begin. It's been a crazy year, but lots of good things to talk about. So firstly, how big is the fine wine market? Well, there's been a number of surveys, and it's largely viewed that the global market's worth about £5 billion, and that's the fine wine market, certainly not FMCG wines. And if you had to compare that to South Africa, my calculations are that the market above 150 Rand a bottle is about 2 billion Rand. The entire wine industry, the GDP of the wine industry in the Cape is about 34 a billion, but a lot of that's tourism, and most of that is large bulk wine. So a very small fine wine market indeed. And if you then take the secondary market into account, that could be as little as 50 or 100 million Rand. So we really are working with a very small market at the moment. It must be said that we have the cheapest wines in the world, and I've argued with the number of people on this, but we'll demonstrate later about the fine wine side. But even on the entry level, it's only really Argentina that produces wine at a lower price than what we do. And if you go back a few months, when the Rand was really weak, we were even ahead of Argentina as the cheapest wine producers anywhere. But we're experiencing an incredible fine wine boom at the moment, and certainly that's part of the conversation today. South African wine is different to other wine around the world in that we have real inflation, and wines do go up every year, and that doesn't happen often in the international market with low inflation. Certainly, we have a currency that's very volatile, and an economy even more so. So that's something to consider. We've also seen that there's customer flight from our retail side. A lot of customers are moving overseas. And then, of course, 2020 has been an e-commerce boom. Wine Cellar's experienced incredible growth this year. And I think every merchant around the world is selling more wine online. Crazy year, James.
Yes, it's been nuts. I mean, it was great to see all these eyeballs on the screen. And I think what's also incredible that we're finding that the market has got more time to listen to what we have to say as an online retailer. But also as a fine wine merchant, there's a greater opportunity for us to convey the fact that vintages are really crucial. And we'll see that as we go further on and we look at kind of what kind of selections have come to the fore, is that we have more time to communicate with the consumer as there are more eyeballs online. So it's been pretty awesome. If you're an online e-commerce producer and you haven't like really upped your game, you're out of the boat, I think.
Good point. Yeah, the communication between every factor in the industry is much quicker today, and things are moving at a rapid pace. So what is the international wine market like? And this is the dashboard from LiveX. If you're a subscriber, you can see the trades on LiveX, and the LiveX is a platform that offers the trading facility, but it also offers the information into the market, and it calculates through an algorithm a market price, which you can see with the 2010 Angelus on screen there in blue. And you can see the bids and last trades, and it's very much like any stock market trading platform around the world. That is the level of sophistication of fine wine, and the liquidity, the number of trades is already tracking upwards, and a lot of this has got to do with technology and moving online. And certainly at Wine Cellar, we've seen this going on, and we certainly would like to move in that direction. But because it's such a small market, we really are at the starting phase of this journey. Johan, you've been working with us for 2 years now. I remember you walking into my office and said, Roland, I'm really excited about the secondary market. How do I get into it? And I said, Johan, why don't you come and work for us? It was that simple. What has it been like for the last 2 years selling vintage wines?
Yeah, I think you're right. To the benefit of the industry, because we come off a small base, and there's been this greater online presence, which Wine Cellar has been well positioned to enjoy the benefit of that growth. There's definitely been exponential growth in the secondary market. Coming back almost to a comment that James made in terms of vintage appreciation, I think because people spend more time online, they listen to what retailers are saying about the value of different vintages and wines being held back. So definitely over the past 18-24 months, we've seen tremendous growth in interest for vintage wines and exchanging wines or brokering wines online. So it's definitely a growing space, no doubt.
And Hugo, you were part of the Strauss journey, a very key part, a founder of the Strauss & Co fine wine auction space. Did you think there was so much wine out there? Because we've been offered a lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. Hi, everybody. The two early thoughts that I'd like to share at this stage is, firstly, it's not a bubble. From my point of view, we are experiencing quite a few factors that's maybe creating an increase, but it's not an artificial increase. It might look that way, but I've seen, and I think a lot of other viewers or commentators have been seeing an increase in the fine wine market in South Africa. I've seen a demand for secondary market since my involvement at Nederburg Auction in 2011, when we've opened it to private buyers. The Nederburg Auction, the only thing that we weren't able to convince the powers that be there to do was to also open it to private sellers. I think this has really kickstarted quite a bit the opportunity to sell fine wine. With that comes quite a bit of challenges for us, and I'm sure there will be questions on that later on. But that for me is one key point, that it's not an artificial boom, it's real from my point of view. I mean, who knows really? And secondly, the supply is still more mature than the demand in the fine wine market space. What I mean by that is I'm sure everybody understands that we're still, from my point of view, a little bit ahead with what we are pushing out there than we are in terms of the knowledge base of the consumer, but that is also catching up at quite a good pace. And I think what you're mentioning about online and time with consumer, that's probably helping a lot at the moment.
Certainly, and we're going to talk about the auction year that we've had. It was an incredible start just after lockdown. So this is some commentary from this week. Fine wine thrives in an unusual year. The year of fine wine started off poorly, with Hong Kong being such a major hub and the unrest happening there. There were US tariffs, which really played havoc with wine going to the US, and a huge market for fine wine. Bordeaux Premier has been struggling, and it's been reducing in in the percentage of investable wine around the world. There's been a question of a Burgundy bubble, as prices in the last 3 years have gone up sort of 33-40% year on year. And then, of course, COVID has come along and smashed everything up. But it's a burgeoning market, and technology has allowed this incredible increase in automated trading. So very much like a stock market, LiveX now has 40% of its trades which are not manual. They're done through bids and buys. And LiveX now has reached a record of stock holding, 83 million pounds. So it really is leading the fine wine space. Wine is less volatile than a lot of other assets around the world. We've seen this in the tracking of the index. And in October, we got to a 10-year high on LiveX. And that's from the big boom over around 2010, 2011, when the Far East got into Bordeaux. And I remember specifically Chateau Lafite 2009 went from £6,000 a case to £40,000 a case just over a few months. And the world of wine went completely nuts. And it came crashing down when the Chinese realized that their wine was only going to be delivered in 2 years' time, and they needed another 15 years for it to actually get to any near maturity. So we're back at those levels, and LiveX is up 4.65% year to date. Here's a quick graph just to show you what fine wine has done against some other indices. And this is only until April. But when the world was crashing, fine wine only dipped a few percent. Yes, the other markets did come back. But had you had fine wine in your portfolio around this time, you could cleverly have mitigated a lot of that downside that was brought on by the COVID crash.
Roland, can I just jump in there quickly on that slide? I'm sure it's obvious to most people and certainly to you, but I've learned that only fairly recently because I'm not economics focused, and it was interesting for me when I learned it in terms of the why is wine as an investment class interesting in these periods when the interest rate falls, etc. So wine sits within the passion asset category, which includes art and classic cars, spirits. Notably, spirits has also done really well because there's no income attached to them, and they're not really related to the rest of the stock market performance. So maybe you might just also add a comment on that, Roland, because I find that super interesting, why it's attractive in these times.
Well, yeah, I think it's twofold. So it's uncorrelated, as you say, to the stock markets around the world. But in this time, I think the number of wealthy people has increased, and that's pushing more people into fine wine. There's certainly a development of the new world, China, India, and other large markets, Africa, that are starting to get into fine wine, and that really just shows an increasing demand for fine wine. So I think those are the major roles, but let's focus more on South Africa, because we could talk about the fine wine market abroad for a long time. And we have a very specific case here in South Africa, and that my view is that fine wine is only about 1, perhaps 2 generations old. So if one looks at Salima, for instance, Thomas Webb is taking over from Giles, Christo Lariche is taking over from Etienne, Rhiannon Borman is taking over from Jacques. And really, those were the custodians of fine wine in the 60s and 70s. They started off this entire revolution, because pre-70s there wasn't much. I think you have to go to Winshaw, who started Chateau Libertas in the 20s. Professor Perrold in the 20s and 30s. They did a lot of university work. That was the foundation of the industry, but the industry was based on volume over quality, and Chenin, Colombard, and Cinsault were the varieties planted. There was also lots of Semillon. But the 80s and 90s, it kickstarted it off. There was a rise of wine estates. We had cooling, we had barrels, we had certification. We really became part of the fine wine world. In one negative, perhaps, we tried to emulate the fine wine world too much, and Montpellier, Geisenheim, UC Davis all preached scientific winemaking, winemaking that applied maybe in Germany or France, and less so in South Africa. And it's taken us a generation or two to unlearn those bad habits and maybe learn better habits. 2000, Parker was a huge player, and that Parker role, that influence actually was felt here in South Africa. James, you remember those 2005 Reds?
Yes, I mean, it was an interesting time. I think you mentioned there was a turn of winemaking style, I think at the end of 1998, around about there, was the first time when wine started to cross the 14% alcohol barrier. And this was all as a precursor and followed on from that whole 2000 onwards, where ripeness, perceived sweetness, dark berry flavors, small barrels, new oak, all played to the tune that was the Parker kind of palate profile and indicated that a wine was of a certain quality. Those were semi-hard lessons for us. We've seen that the traditional winemakers kind of kept to their same kind of tune, and in the end of the day, they came through. You think of the Paul Sauers that kind of stayed and kept to traditional winemaking. So we've learned a lot, and I think that's also leads to another point, is that the time to get into fine wine is right now, because probably with the 2015 vintage, we're starting to see a real return on all the lessons that we've seen from the late 90s and this whole Parker period of the 2000s. That, those wines, there was much more volatility in quality maybe, but in terms of bankability and being able to say 15 vintage across the board from a Stellenbosch cab, or now the 17 vintage, the quality really is there, because the younger winemakers, it's as if we found our own feet. So I think this is the best time to start. We're right at the beginning of the fine wine revolution in South Africa.
Certainly. Okay, where are we today? Well, we're in a tough space in a broad sense, in that we're losing 1% of our vineyards per year. If you go back 20 years, we had 110,000 hectares. We're now down to 90. And it's probably going to continue with the glut of wine in the market at the moment. Bulk wine prices are low, stocks are high, and the large producers might not even take their full quota next year. So it really is struggling at the bottom end. But we still have cheap wines at the top end, and that's a graph from 2014, but it's still up today that a 90-point wine from around the world is the cheapest from South Africa, and continues to be so. And we are moving up that scale, but so are the others. And we really do make the cheap wines. If you compare our most expensive versus cheap, that multiple is about 2,000, say 30 Rand to 6,000 Rand. Whereas in France, that multiple is 10,000. There are extremely expensive wines, and that just shows you their heritage, their culture, their history of fine wine. But today we've got 400 pointers over the last few years, one from Neil Martin and 3 from Tematkin. And the world is excited by South African wines. The young guns, the new wave, Eben continues to reinvent himself. The likes of Rosa Kruger have pushed South Africa into an exciting new space. And it's been exciting being part of that journey for the last 10 years.
Yeah, Roland, just on that, in terms of the price multiple you mentioned, I think you mentioned our most expensive wines turning at around 6,000 Rand a bottle. But if you even step back 5 years, speaking of 1,000 to 1,500 Rand bottle of wine was really the upper echelon, was almost unheard of. So it's really in this last 4, 5, 8 years that we've seen a real growth. So to that extent, we're still very well geared, as you say, in terms of our pricing, to really see an appreciation and a growth in what our wines can offer.
Yeah, on that point, I always remember the story when I cut my teeth at Hamilton Russell Vineyards just after university. I was selling the 2001 Chardonnay, and it just broached the 100 Rand level. And we'd have these Varleys from Joburg come down and taste the wine and say, "Oh, that's nice. I'd like some." And I say, "Yeah, it's 100 Rand. Oh, 100 Rand a case. Excellent." It was a big moment for the industry, and the Hamilton Russell wines have steadily gone up above inflation since then, making them incredible investments from both inside and outside. A little bit about Wine Cellar. We started in 2001. We've been brokering wine for a long time, ever since cellars needed to be brokered, I guess. But in 2010, we made a really big step towards the fine wine market in South Africa. Before that, we really were just importers and sellers. And that sort of kicks in with the new generation, let's call it, the Arlights, the Molyneux, the Porcelainbergs. It was 10 years after Eben had come in, and things were just starting to get exciting. In 2014, we went online. We offered our first investment portfolios, and Strauss happened last year. And of course, online boom was certainly important. We sell about 150,000 bottles annually, and we store about 450,000 in our cellars. And I say we're a dominant secondary market presence, but frankly, there are very few other players in the market, and we're humbled to champion it, but I think it's got to be done, and it's an exciting journey from our side. Hugo, what a crazy year for the auctions.
Indeed, we didn't start this year, even though it might look that way. We started in 2019. I mean, the conversation started in 2018. But yeah, this year is really the year that it's taken off. To answer your question of earlier, Roland, you touched on supply. I mean, that's really part of the success of the model, I suppose. It's obviously the key thing is that we need to have buyers, but we've really seen a very healthy increase in real sellers coming our way. In the beginning, it was interesting. I think some folks still imagine the rarity factor of wine to be special packaging or a special signature or something of it. So that education around fine wines is certainly still happening in South Africa, and I think everybody's playing their part. But what we're starting to see now is some real cool collectors that have been around for a long time, that's probably been watching us for a while and saying, hey, I could trade some wine for prices that I'm happy with and then buy some stuff that I would prefer now. Because that's something that happens in fine wine, is your taste might change a little bit. Or you bought 12 and you drank 6 and you don't really feel like drinking the other 6, or whatever it might be. So I think certainly some part of the motivation of having done this was to try and create a secondary market and to formalize it, as you say. But part of it is really also, establishing a fine wine culture. And when I say that, we're not only looking for folks to come and trade wines, it's really, we're trying to advise people to drink older wines and to be happy with what they're drinking. And that's the beauty of fine wine buying, is, if you're buying something that you love, that's always my recommendation. If people ask me what to buy in terms of, I suppose, the assets gaining value and so forth. But I think if you're buying something you love, then you're winning either way, because even if it doesn't gain that much value, you're going to be able to liquidate the asset. But anyway, let's just comment on your slide here. I mean, those are really good results. We started last year with way below half of that. I don't think anybody else is touching that from an auction point of view. Also considering the amount of bottles that we've traded. Those are some highlights that's on there. The Petrus 89, of course, is the legendary 100-pointer, so that price makes sense. But Roland, you'd know better, but that must be a record in the South African sense. Another definite record in the South African sense was the Kanonkop Paul Sauer, that 19 large format vertical. That was one of those special lots that came our way. It's been sitting at Kanonkop for a long time. It's just beautiful, and it got what it deserved. That was really beautiful to see that. There's some other highlights there. Wynne Constance 87, that's the first vintage. I see Roland just adjusted that to 750 ml price. It sold for less than that on 500 milliliters. But the 86, actually in 2019, the 1986 sold for 35,000 Rand for one bottle for 500 ml. So we're seeing some really good results with Wynne Constance. It's one of our sort of highlights in the auction space. And then we all know the Paul Sauer story. I think that was kind of in the period August when that sold the Magnum for 14K, valuing it around 7,000 a bottle. I think that was maybe the height of the peak of. It's probably valued a little bit below that now, but I'm sure we'll touch on Paul Sauer a little bit.
Yeah, we will talk about the Pulsar, but actually, Hugo, that's from the last Bordeaux auction. We haven't had Magnums on, and that was a small Magnum parcel that went for that price. So those highlights are effectively in each category in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2020 teens. Those are the record prices for this year. And I just think grateful to see Sadi family, Mevrouw Kirsten, one of the rarest wines that we produce, arguably the most rare, really getting incredible prices this year. And there you can see Alistair. Alistair's our auctioneer. He's incredible. He's got I think a doctorate, Hugo, in art from Oxford. Incredibly bright individual and knowledgeable man, and a great auctioneer. And I think it's been an asset having Alistair on our side auctioneering this year.
Yeah, that's maybe something that should be mentioned. The smooth integration between with Strauss coming into the wine space. All credit to them. Yeah, they certainly have a lot of expertise in the company with regards to auctioneering, and with regards to art. I mean, it's remarkable how much passion and knowledge there is in Strauss with regards to art. But wine's something completely new to them, and they've just really transisted into that really well, obviously with the guidance of Wine Cellar and myself. But it's just been an awesome story with regards to how far we've come in the space of 18 months.
Indeed, and the transition onto online was also incredible. That first auction that was decided to be live online, Alistair ran with it in his slide, and the last auction we did live, where you had to pronounce Domaine Fourrière and Chèvre Chambertin, I thought it was pretty incredible. They really are true auctioneers and leaders in the market. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that a wine is never an investment until it's drunk at some point. And I think the biggest question that we get at Wine Cellar is, when do I drink it? Well, that's important. You need to understand from your own point of view if you like fresher wines or if you like more mature wines. And the only way to do that is to drink and taste well-stored older bottles. Unfortunately, a lot of the older wines that we do come across haven't been stored correctly, and they don't show the character that they should have down the line. And that brings us to another point, which is important. One of our customers asked us, what guarantee is there when we buy wine on auction, or if we buy it from Wine Cellar, that this wine is truly at the potential that it's sold for? And really, there isn't a guarantee, and that's fine wine. It's been based on trust for hundreds of years. It's still based that way in the UK, in the biggest fine wine market. I think today you're getting much more certainty about cork taint. Although, James, I think we've had a number of scary corked wines this year, but. Really, one needs to make sure that you're storing it correctly, and if you do purchase, you purchase from a top seller. So if Hugo, Johan, James, or myself do come across a parcel of older wine, or if we put it on auction, that means we've tasted extensively, we've vetted that seller, we're putting our names on it. It certainly isn't a guarantee that the wines are going to be excellent, but they are they're about as good as you're going to get, and we believe in them. That's important. And then, of course, if you're looking at for older wines, there are a lot of ways to check if they have been stored correctly, just by the label, the ullage, the cork, the color of the wine, the notes, and these sorts of things. James, what would you say to someone that maybe is new to wine and doesn't understand the difference between a young wine and a 20, 30-year-old wine?
Yeah, I think that's important to understand that when you're engaging with this wonderful product that's called wine, that is a natural product. And part of its appeal is that once it's released, after that, slowly but surely, there's a diminishing amount of that product in the market because it gets drunk. It's not like a piece of art that stays there permanently. Slowly but surely, there's less and less of it in the world. The quality of the wine will be spoken about. You'll have all the media and you'll have critics' notes, etc., to go along with that. But what you expect of older wine is that you have a little bit of you have less fruit showing through. You have a wine that's moved on in character. It's often softens. Sometimes it still needs to soften more. You have a color depreciation, and your wine tends to move to a more savory kind of spectrum. I think what is crucial going forward when buying these kind of wines or older wines is that you also develop and educate your palate. You might like wines to have a certain kind of window of age on them, but certainly I think what's also crucial is to learn how to serve them and how to enjoy them. There are quite a few varying areas that are important. The one is to make sure that the wine is stored upright if it's really old wine, to give it time to get rid of its sediment to the bottom. It's crucial to open it as carefully as possible. I mean, corks are, they again, it's a natural product. They are different from cork to cork. So do a bit of Googling, a bit of YouTubing, make sure you know how to open a cork, be patient about it when it's an old bottle. Remember, it's been in the bottle for 30 or 40 or 50 years, so give it a bit of time. And I think then what's important is that try not to have any of that cork kind of fall into the wine. That is crucial to keep it as clean as possible and decant it off its sediment. And then taste it immediately, especially if it's an old bottle of wine. But if it seems that it needs a bit of air, give it a bit of air, but don't give it air just willy-nilly. It might also have a small window where it's absolutely beautiful and perfect. So engage with it right from the beginning. Old wine is not something that needs to be decanted to give it some air. And learn, open these wines. We're going to open some more of these in the future. I'm sure Strauss will open some more. And this is a perfect time to start educating while some of these wines are still inexpensive, trust me.
Right. So let's talk about the Paul Sauer price, because this has been the most exciting wine of the year. I remember when it got the 100 points, Johan and I and James were talking in the office, where's this going to go? What price is this wine going to sell for? And immediately I saw it in retail for incredible prices, up to 4,000 or 5,000 rand. And I remember we laughed at each other. So we didn't see any on our sort of brokerage or have any customers come to us until sort of the next year, where we bumped it up a bit. And then it went on auction last year and reached incredible prices. And we were a bit more humble with our market price. And then this year, that first online auction in March, where the prices reached almost 6,000 rand. That was just a phenomenal. And we still thought that could have been an anomaly until it happened again in August and wasn't much lower in November. But we've been selling the wine now for 3,500 rand. Johan, what's been the uptake at that sort of price level at 3,500?
Yeah, it's interesting, Roland. I think maybe just taking a step back from your question, I think part of the story for us is almost stewarding the culture behind the wine. This is still a fine wine product. It's something we appreciate and respect. So it's not purely just about pushing price. And to that end, I think we were always a touch conservative in escalating the price as we saw stronger and stronger demand for it. You mentioned the 3,500 being a seeming plateau at this point in time, and still at this price level, we see demand for the wine. If we have wines available and we make them available on our online store, or we offer it privately to some of our customers, we rarely see pushback on it. There's still uptake at this level. Obviously, when we speak about the fine wine market in South Africa, as you pointed out right at the start, I think Savas defines premium wines as being 75 or 80 rand or up. Hugo or James, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, speaking about wines that sells for 3,500 rand a bottle really speaks to a very niche segment of the market in South Africa. Having said that, there's still demand at that level. And I think it's because we're moving into that space where globally people are realizing that in quality terms, South Africa has come a long way. And when you compare that to peers in the Bordeaux or the Rhone, or not even touching on Burgundy, and maybe it's unfair to just crisscross and compare regions like that, but purely from a qualitative or consumer perspective, 2,500 or 3,500 rand for a bottle of wine that has a lot of critic backing behind it is really not an inflated or a blown up price. And I think that's why we're still seeing fair demand at this level.
That's a good call. If you were to buy a Smith Out Lafite 2009 or a Pontic Canet, a wine that's maybe not first growth, those wines will be double or triple the value and sell between 5,000 and 6,000 rand a bottle. So 3,500 to 4,500, 5,000, even 6,000 rand is not really unrealistic for Paul Sauer. Where to from here? I think your guess is like ours. There is going to be a stock in the market moving forward, and I think that's been a very important part of what we've been doing. We need to make sure that the future secondary market has wine, and we've sold a lot of wine to be sold in the future. And the Paul Sauer 15, I think, will be selling on the secondary market for a very long time to come.
Roland, can I just jump in there quickly? I've heard from quite a few friends that work in retail in the UK specifically, and I don't mean that's limited to the UK. This is just more sort of where I have friends, but they all made comments about that there's almost an opening of mind happening towards experimenting with the option of taking a New World wine as opposed to a classic region at the high end. I'm not talking about the 40, 50 pounds. So, you know, I think consumers are always happy to experiment a little bit with New World wines. But now all of a sudden, you know, also I think Bordeaux is losing a little bit of glamour, for instance. So consumers are starting to go, and the wines like these have certainly helped because, you know, I think people are numbers bound. So if very serious critics are starting to say this wine is 100 points or 95 to 100 points, and this really classic wine 5 times the price is also those amounts of points, then certainly you're willing to have a look at it and taste and experiment for yourself. And I think that's really exciting to hear, because I don't think minds were open to that much on a broad scale in the past 10 years ago.
Yep. Last comment on that, Hugo. I think great comment. I believe that the UK market's price, which is now sitting very close to what our market price is, even a touch more, I think it was influenced by what's happening in South Africa rather than Tim Atkins' score. Because in the UK, if a wine is going to leap in price, it's going to do so on the announcement of the score, not 2 years later, which is what we're seeing here. So I think the South African wine, this could be the first instance ever where a South African wine is setting the price here on the secondary market somewhere else. And that's in the biggest fine wine market in the world. So, you know, watch the space for investing in South African wines in the UK. So how have we conceptualized investing in wine? We 2 or 3 years ago, we saw there was huge opportunity here, and we thought, well, we would start a wine fund, and the FSB would not take kindly to that. Being a liquor product, not easy to get around all the regulations. So our view was we're going to sell parcels of wine, which we believe to be the most investable, and we'll give you a free cellaring period in order for you to make that transaction as easy as possible. And in 2018, we released the VIP 2015. And thankfully, the Paul Sauer was a good contributor in the portfolio, and the wine is the portfolio is now worth 170,000. Johan, that's a very interesting point. Is the VIP 15 worth 170,000 because of its components, or because of the brand equity of that portfolio?
Oh, well, that's a very good question, Roland. I think it's almost it's a similar question in terms of styling a blend or a single varietal almost. You know, is the sum of its parts worth more than, you know, those singular products? And I think over time we'll see that the sum of the parts are going to be worth more, for the simple reason that as demand continues to grow, and my view, and I think we all share this view, as demand continues to grow for fine South African wine, having parcels or baskets of wine that have been essentially curated from great vintages that have basically bulletproof provenance in South Africa is going to become rarer over time, simply because of the diminishing supply. As James already pointed out, the basic economics of wine just makes sense from that perspective as well. So I think having from a consumer end, the luxury or the ability to say, look, I've got a portfolio of excellent 2015s. I don't have to go and shop or ask or look for it. It's already available here. I've got it. And by the way, it includes some wines which now, not just Paul Sauer. I mean, if you look at some of the other cabs that are included there, in that 2015 lineup. Those are incredible wines, and having them available all in one place, I think, is almost worth more than just purely the singular brands that are involved.
Okay, thanks, Johan. And we did a 2017 VIP. 2018, we started a bit more of an alternative type of portfolio. That was the ARP 2018. And since then, we haven't seen a vintage that really was VIP worthy in our minds. We're waiting for the 2020 vintage. And therefore, we've been offering PIPs every month, which are the most investable wines. And they've been selling well. I think we have one left this month, and this is the December portfolio. And it's got a nice mix. I don't know if any one of the panelists wants to comment on the mix, but I like the fact that having a stockbroking portfolio, you've always got a mixed portfolio of some blue chips, of some rising stars, and here we try and do that. You've got Kanonkop, there is Buchenholz Kloof, Takara Vergelegen, but then there's also outliers as well in Lismore, Restless River, Damascene. These are relatively new players on the block.
Yeah, just on the back of that, Roland, I think also what we're trying to achieve, or what we're targeting in terms of the PIPs, as you say, is really to offer a diversified collection. But also, if you consider the price point of these wines, really the outlier would be the Lariche Reserve Cab. But the rest, on average, these wines are 450 Rand or so per bottle. And what we've seen in the secondary market, the growth in value is really over the first 5 to 8 years in terms of appreciation. So having the ability to buy these now at these prices, whatever your outcome would be, I tend to share Hugo's point of view that, buy the wines you like, and just enjoy them over time. And from that perspective, buying these wines now at these kind of prices and having mature wines in 5 or 8 years' time that are certainly going to be worth much more than they are now, I think that's just a great option to have.
What we haven't really spoken about is wine critics in South Africa. I don't think there's going to be time, but we do track the scores, and you can see there's an aggregated score there where we use WineMag, Tim Atkin, Neil Martin, Vinus, Wine Spectator to track the scores, which seems like a superfluous exercise. But if you map these, which is on the next screen, you will see that there's an incredible correlation between the fine wines of South Africa and where they offer value. Essentially, any dots above that blue and yellow line means that the wine is very highly scored for the price, and therefore offers really good investment potential. If the scores are much lower than that line, the wine is arguably higher in price. And we didn't pick these wines because they fitted into this graph. It was just amazing to see that we can see the value in the market, and that value is correlated price and score. It must be said that most critics are tasting cited, which means that there's brand equity built into the score. Neil Martin's not going to give a brand new wine 100 points, but one with track record certainly will get that kudos much easily, and that's got to do with brand equity.
Roland, just a comment from my side on scores and where we are in South Africa. Once again, I qualify all of these comments as my point of view, but I think most of these critics, we're certainly not ungrateful for the high scores, but I think most of the critics, if they're being honest, will admit that what's happening in South Africa is not as a result of the high scores. The high scores are happening as a result of what's happening in South Africa. I really think that one should note that as a distinction. I think the quality revolution that you spoke about earlier is not just brought along by some producers. Across the board, the classic producers, the cooperatives, everybody's making better wine. So it's great that we're getting recognition. I'm not going to deny score inflation and all of the above. But I think, South Africa is just taking its rightful place in the fine wine space. And the irony is, you spoke about storage conditions and these sort of things earlier. All of that taps into the fine wine culture. We just simply haven't been valuing our wines to keep them well. It's, for me, a simple thing like that. And once we start doing that, we'll start to see how well our wines can age. And if anybody wants to contest that, just drink some of the best vintages from the 60s of some of these really great wines, our vineyards can produce wines that can age that long. So yeah, I'm just saying it's a natural thing. It's not being brought about by little blips.
Indeed. No, you're right. It's one comes with the other. Last slide before we move on to a couple questions. What is going to happen to the Paul Sauer 2018? I think everyone has been asking. Thankfully, we have a very good allocation at Wine Cellar. Those are the market prices that we've been selling back vintages for. And if you look at those compound annual growth rates, they certainly do peak early on, and they don't seem to grow as fast as long. So that's maybe one thing to keep in mind. We also trying to figure out how much score plays as a role. If it doesn't get 100, does 97 make a big difference? Is there a correlation between the score and the price? At the moment, it seems like the older is generally more expensive or more perceived to be of higher value, but certainly there are vintages which are better than others. And we haven't traded any of the 2018 yet, but I think that wine is going to immediately jump quite close to 2,000 Rand. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think a finer dynamic, especially with something like Porcelainberg in comparison to Paul Sauer, is there's something that comes into play, which is production volume as well. Something like Porcelainberg is also very well distributed through their channels, but in terms of the amount of product available, with Tim Atkin already breaking the ice with the Paul Sauer, there's anticipation in the industry every year. He comes to release his next report, and when Porcelainberg came out, and I think you haven't got that on the slide, and we don't have to go into detail, but wines like Olera Say number 2 that Neil Martin awarded the 100 points, and Skirfberg similarly as well. Frustratingly, almost, there's not a lot of these wines, and just purely from an economics perspective, that's certainly going to push price. But as you say, Roland, your guess is as good as mine in terms of where the price is going to go, but it's definitely not going to stay there.
All right, let's answer these two questions that came through. Negociants in South Africa, is it more experimental, or are they striving for quality? I think a good point. If you look on a global perspective, most great producers do own their own vineyards, but there are plenty that don't. You look at Champagne, for instance, a lot of it is purchased in. So as long as the grower is generally looking after the vineyards themselves and has control of that with a long lease, there's no reason why the quality can't be as high. And certainly the new wave, young guns, all those top producers, the Arlights, Mullinews, they've only just started dipping their toes into vineyard ownership 10 years down the line. That's how long it takes. So it's certainly not a passing fad, but in time you would expect those top producers to purchase their own vineyards and therefore be less negociant-like. And then is there foreign buy-in?
Sorry, can I just jump in there before you go to the next? I mean, that's such a great question. I think we should maybe pause on that with one more comment. Part of what's happening in South Africa is the excitement around science. I mean, we're learning as we go, and there's so much initiatives happening with regards to clone material, the correct sites. Many people argue that the best places in the Cape haven't been discovered yet in terms of where to plant and then planting the correct varietals and clones and so forth on the soil types. So once that, and the only way to really discover that is by means of these, what the question asker calls negociant, but it's, maybe pioneers or guys that go and discover the plots and vinify small amounts of them. I agree with you, eventually they will own vineyards, but I think this is definitely driving the quality. If the producer shows integrity, which the top guys do, we certainly include them as our fine wine bundle from our view.
I also think, sorry, Hugo, I just want to add to that. I think this lower barrier to entry, where you were allowed to be a negociant, has been absolutely crucial to create these winemakers that have been able to step up to the international plate. We're making wines, and we mustn't forget that these wines are of the best wines in the world now. They aren't like catching up. And it's been this lower barrier to entry where they've been allowed to express their dreams and follow their own rules and rules of excellence. And I think So the negotiation model was absolutely crucial for this whole revolution to start.
Absolutely, and if you go back 30 years, Neil Ellis was the first negotiant in the 70s, and look what he's done to progress the industry. He was the first producer to buy grapes from someone else and make a wine out of it. Is the secondary market exclusive to the local market? We've certainly been trying our best to market internationally, and we have seen an uptick this year in international buyers. And we do have a strategy next year for that to be more and more visible, with Strauss going more and more online, with Wine Cellar being more and more online. That allows for international trade. And yes, we have seen a big uptick in that.
Yeah, and I think interestingly enough, Roland, sorry, just a comment on that again, because I think it's worth taking a longer term view again, because of what's happening in the UK, as you rightly pointed out earlier on. Just because of our tiny volumes being available in South Africa of fine wine that we produce in comparison to some of the more classic regions that do larger volumes, there are a lot of people in the UK that visit South Africa regularly in any case, so it's of value to them, or they find it as being valuable to say, well, I've got my merchant in London or in the UK that looks after me, or in Europe, but I'll buy some in South Africa as well. So I think that's definitely driving some of the demand. It's slow and it's coming off a small base, as we've said, but there'll definitely be international demand going forward, no doubt.
Excellent. Well, if there are no further questions, maybe a last word or two from the panelists. From my side, it's been an amazing journey at Wine Cellar for the last 15 years, selling fine wines, importing wines, but selling this new generation of fine South African wines, and I'll continue to be part of that moving forward. It's been a great journey, and we've got one more question. As a rookie in the wine industry showing interest, do you have to be more knowledgeable? I think that's the point of a PIP, is to allow investors to not know too much about it, trust on Wine Cellar to give them the most investable wines, and we've seen good returns, and we've have, I think, one portfolio left on the PIP side, Johan.
Yeah, that's correct. So December has ticked over nicely. I think a driver of that has been Porcelainberg, but I agree with you 100%. The beauty of something like a PIP is it's curated, and because we spend our time in the industry working with the fine wines regularly, we believe we've got a fairly accurate view of what the great wines are. It's the wines we like to drink ourselves. I think that's part of the culture we like to establish. It's wines we like to drink ourselves. It's not just purely a financial asset for us. We like drinking these wines. So we definitely believe in these wines, and that's the beauty of it.
I see you decanting your GS66 there on the right hand side. What are you having that with later, Johan?
That would have been nice. Unfortunately, it's only of display value. But if I had that, to be very honest, I wouldn't have had it with food. I would have put the kids to bed and sat with my wife and just enjoyed it on its own, almost giving it its due respect. So no, unfortunately, it's only ornamental in its value.
Well,
at this stage.
That reminds me maybe of my closing remark. We were able to be involved with the recorking of 2 large cellars of GS over the last year. So Johan, I think you tasted a good 30-40 bottles. You know what GS tastes like now. Hugo was also there. James has had it before. I mean, that's been an icon wine in my career. Just briefly, I remember buying a bottle at a bottle store for 10 Rand, and not too much longer after that, I had lunch with Jancis Robinson, and she gave it 20 out of 20, the first South African wine ever to have achieved such a feat, and the price has steadily gone up to 35,000 Rand for later sales. So it's shown what the potential of South African wine is. Anyway, thank you very much for attending. We're going to have a exciting 2021 with an auction program with more offers from Wine Cellar. The wine is only getting better and better, and the market is getting bigger. So expect the demand to increase, the prices to increase, and now's a good time to get into South African fine wine. Thanks, gents.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roland.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thanks, bye.